The galaxy was wide and full of wonders, yet few beings ever spoke softly. Most races were loud, proud, and arrogant, each thinking their empire was eternal. But among them walked a single human, a quiet man named Elias Kane. He had no army, no noble house, no flag behind him. Only a ship that looked old and a past that no one really knew. He was a wanderer, carrying scars from wars that most aliens had only read about in their history scrolls. One night, his ship landed on the edge of the Lyrian Empire, a place known for beauty and cruelty in equal measure. The Lyrians were tall, silver-skinned beings with glowing eyes and a culture built on perfection. To fail in public was shame. To show emotion was weakness. Their queen Leora was said to be the most perfect of all, a woman born to command but cursed with a heart too human for her own people. When Elias first saw her, she stood before the council, wrapped in silver silk, her voice steady but her eyes full of quiet pain. She was being accused of failure. The enemy fleet had broken through one of their border sectors, and though she had tried to negotiate peace, the council called it cowardice. Elias had only come to deliver supplies, but the argument drew him closer. Through the glass wall of the council chamber, he saw her lower her head while the others shouted. Her lips trembled, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Don't shame me." Those words stopped him, not because of fear, but because of how human they sounded. Every tone carried pain, not arrogance. Elias didn't know her, yet something inside him moved. He saw not a queen, not an alien ruler, but a woman trying not to break. The council dismissed her coldly, and the guards led her down the corridor. Elias followed at a distance. She didn't cry, didn't stumble, but when she thought no one was watching, she stopped beside a window and pressed her hand to the glass. Outside, the twin suns were setting, painting her silver skin in gold. Elias spoke softly. "You tried to save lives. That's not shame." She turned sharply, her glowing eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't speak to me." "You're human, aren't you?" "This is not your world," he nodded. "It's not. But pain looks the same everywhere." For a moment, she didn't answer. The wind through the corridor moved the strands of her white hair. Then her voice softened. "You wouldn't understand. Here, a leader must never show weakness. I did, and now I'll be remembered for it." Elias smiled faintly. "Where I come from, only fools hide their hearts. The strong ones let others see them bleed and still stand tall." Her eyes widened a little, as if no one had ever spoken to her like that before. "You think that's strength?" she asked quietly. He nodded again. "Yes, and I think you already have it." That night, the city lights dimmed across the Lyrian capital. Elias was told to leave by dawn, but he couldn't rest. Something about the queen stayed in his mind. He wandered the palace gardens, and there she was again, standing under the floating lights of the moon trees. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her voice calm but wary. "Because someone should tell you that you don't need to carry their blame," he replied. She looked down. "You speak as if you can see through me." He stepped closer, his boots silent on the white stone. "Maybe I do." Her lips curved into a sad smile. "Then tell me, human, what do you see?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "I see someone who's been trying too hard to be perfect for people who don't deserve her." Silence filled the garden. The soft blue lights around them shimmered. For the first time in many years, Leora felt something inside her chest tremble. Not anger, not pride, but a strange warmth she didn't understand. "You shouldn't say such things," she whispered. "It's forbidden for a human to speak to me this way." "Then punish me," he said gently, "but I won't lie." For a moment, she wanted to turn away, to command the guards, to remind him of the walls between their kinds, but she didn't. Her heart, once cold from duty, now beat faster than she could control. She realized that this stranger from a broken world had seen her, not as a symbol, not as a ruler, but as a person. When he finally walked away, she watched him disappear into the night, his silhouette fading among the moonlit paths. She pressed a hand over her heart, feeling the strange ache he had left behind. For the first time, she didn't fear being seen. She feared being forgotten. The next morning came with soft golden light over the palace city. The twin suns rose slowly, touching the silver towers and mirrored streets of the Lyrian capital. Elias woke in his small guest room, hearing the faint hum of the city preparing for another day. He was supposed to leave, but his heart told him not to. Something about the queen's voice from last night, that soft whisper of pain, still echoed in his mind. He stepped out into the garden where they had met. The moonlights were gone, replaced by soft rays of dawn. The air smelled of silver blossoms. He looked around, half hoping she would appear again, though he knew it was foolish. But then he saw movement near the far gate, Queen Leora walking alone, her long robe flowing like mist behind her. She did not have her guards with her. For a ruler of her kind, that was strange. When she saw him, she stopped but did not look surprised. It was as if she already knew he would be there. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "You didn't leave." Elias smiled a little. "I don't walk away when someone needs help." Her silver eyes lowered. "You're a strange human. Most of your kind avoid us. They call us proud and heartless." He looked at her calmly. "And are you?" She hesitated. "I try not to be, but my people, they only understand strength. They don't forgive softness." "Then maybe they've forgotten what strength really means," he said quietly. She looked up at him again, and for a moment the proud queen vanished. Only the woman remained, the one who was tired, who wanted someone to listen without judgment. "I made a choice," she said. "I tried to spare lives by agreeing to peace talks. The council said I failed the empire, but the truth is I couldn't stand to see more young soldiers die." Elias nodded slowly. "You did the right thing." "No," she said bitterly. "Here, mercy is weakness." He stepped closer. "Then maybe mercy needs a defender." Her lips parted as if to reply, but a sharp sound interrupted them, the sound of boots on stone. A group of armored Lyrian guards appeared at the garden gate. The one in front, Captain Varen, looked furious. "Human," he said coldly. "You were ordered to leave before sunrise. The Queen's presence is not for you." Elias stayed still, his expression calm. "I meant no disrespect." The captain turned to Leora. "My queen, this human has broken the boundary of protocol. Shall I remove him?" Leora's throat tightened. Her people were watching her now. She had to answer as a ruler, not as the woman who had spoken with him beneath the moon trees. She took a slow breath. "No," she said finally. "He is a guest. He has not harmed anyone." The captain frowned. "But your grace..." "Enough," she said firmly. "He will leave when he chooses." The guard stepped back slowly, bowing. But the look in their eyes showed that word of this would spread fast. When they were gone, she turned to Elias. "Now you've made things worse. They'll say you have influence over me." He smiled gently. "Then let them talk. The truth doesn't fear gossip." She looked at him for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You speak as if you've known shame before." He nodded. "I have. On Earth, I fought for people who didn't believe in me. I was told I was too soft, too kind to be a soldier. But when the war came, kindness kept me human while others lost themselves. You remind me of that battle." Her eyes softened. "You lost much, didn't you?" He looked toward the horizon. "Everyone who matters." Silence fell again. She stepped closer, her robe brushing the grass. "Then why do you still fight?" "Because if I stop," he said, "everything I lost means nothing." For the first time, she understood him, not as a human, not as an outsider, but as someone who had carried the same invisible weight she did. The need to keep going even when the world called it weakness. Later that day, she called for a meeting in the smaller council chamber. To everyone's surprise, she asked Elias to stand beside her. The council murmured in shock, but she didn't care. When they demanded her reasoning, she said calmly, "He comes from a world that knows the price of war. Perhaps we can learn something from him." Elias said little, only listening, but his quiet presence unsettled them. To the Lyrians, humans were supposed to be primitive, emotion-driven and unpredictable. Yet this one spoke with calm and looked at them without fear. After the meeting, as they walked down the long crystal hall, she whispered, "You shouldn't have come. They'll try to use this against you." He smiled faintly. "They already see me as nothing." "That gives me freedom." She paused, looking at him, realizing how much truth rested in that simple answer. In her world, power was a cage. For him, humility was freedom. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the human who had seen through her mask so easily. When she closed her eyes, she remembered his words. Mercy needs a defender. Somewhere deep inside her heart, something had begun to change. She was no longer afraid of being seen. For the first time, she wondered what it would mean to live not as the perfect queen, but as Leora, the woman who had almost forgotten how to feel. The palace had changed in small but strange ways since the human came. The servants whispered quietly when Elias walked through the halls. Some bowed with respect, others turned away in silence. To them he was a mystery. Neither noble nor slave, yet the queen treated him with quiet regard. Rumors spread fast through the Lyrian capital. Some said he was a secret advisor from another world. Others said the queen had broken her vow of silence to speak with him under the moonlight. Leora tried to ignore the noise, but she could feel the eyes of her council everywhere. Their faces were calm, yet their words were sharp. Every decision she made was questioned now. The pressure weighed on her, and yet, whenever she saw Elias standing near the garden or walking through the library, something inside her steadied. One evening, she called him to her private observatory, a glass room at the highest tower of the palace. The stars stretched above them like rivers of light, the same stars that looked down on both their worlds. She stood near the edge, her long robe swaying in the gentle wind. When he entered, she didn't turn. "You shouldn't come here so often," she said softly. "The council watches every step I take." Elias walked closer, his voice calm. "And do you follow their rules because they're right, or because you're afraid to stand alone?" Her fingers tightened around the silver rail. "You think it's that simple?" "It usually is," he said. She turned then, her eyes glowing faintly under the starlight. "You don't understand, Elias. I rule because I must. I can't act as I wish. My choices are bound by tradition, by honor." He studied her face, quiet for a long time before he answered. "Maybe that's why your people can't change. Honor without compassion becomes pride, and pride destroys everything it touches." His words hit her like a soft strike. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Not with anger, but with honesty. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that the Lyrians had survived because of their rules. But deep down she knew he was right. The silence stretched between them. Finally, she whispered, "Sometimes I wish I could be like you. Free to speak, to walk, to feel without fear." He smiled gently. "You could. You just don't believe it yet." Before she could reply, the door slid open. Captain Varen stepped inside with 2 guards. His face was pale with urgency. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing quickly, "the border colonies are under attack. The Zelkai fleet has broken through the defense wall. We've lost contact with Sector 9. Leora's heart stopped. "How many ships?" "Too many," Varen said grimly. "They're moving fast. If we don't respond, they'll reach the home system within hours." She straightened, all signs of weakness gone. "Prepare the fleet. I'll lead the defense myself." Varen blinked in shock. "Your Majesty, that's not allowed. The council forbids the ruler from taking the field." "I will not sit behind glass while my people burn," she said sharply. "Send the command." When the guards left, Elias spoke quietly. "You're going to fight?" She looked at him, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, this time I won't wait for their permission." He nodded slowly. "Then I'm coming with you." Her eyes widened. "You're not a soldier in my army." He gave a faint smile. "No, but I've fought wars before, and if I've learned anything, it's that no one should fight alone." Her lips parted, but she didn't argue. Something in his eyes told her he would follow her no matter what she said. And though part of her feared for him, another part felt stronger knowing he would be near. Hours later, the royal flagship lifted from the palace docks, its engines roaring across the night sky. Leora stood on the bridge, dressed in battle armor made of silver plates and blue light. Elias stood beside her, wearing a simple pilot suit. Outside the glass, the stars bent into streaks as the ship jumped into the void. The fleet formed around them, thousands of shining ships. But the enemy was already waiting, a swarm of black vessels cutting through the light like blades. The moment battle began, the silence vanished. The stars filled with fire. Leora commanded with calm precision, her voice firm and sure. Yet behind the control screens, her mind raced. Every ship lost, every explosion she saw felt like a wound inside her. Elias worked beside her, coordinating the damaged units and rerouting the comms. His focus was sharp, his movements steady. At one point, a blast struck the flagship's side, shaking the deck violently. Leora stumbled, and he caught her before she fell. For a brief second, their eyes met. The bridge lights flickered around them, and time seemed to freeze. "You should be safe," he said quietly. "So should you," she replied, her voice trembling but strong. Another blast threw them apart, and the ship alarms screamed. But Leora didn't falter. She returned to the command chair, her voice rising over the chaos. "All ships form a wall. Hold the line. No retreat." The crew obeyed instantly. The humans' courage and the Queen's command moved together like one force, Hours passed, and slowly the tide began to turn. The enemy ships started to pull back, their formations breaking. When the last of them vanished into the dark, silence filled the bridge again. Leora stood breathing hard, staring at the quiet stars. Elias walked to her side, his face tired but calm. "You did it," he said softly. She shook her head. "We did." For a long time they stood there together, watching the empty space where fire had been. She wanted to say more, to tell him how his presence had given her strength, but she stayed silent. Her people would never understand what was growing between them. Yet as the stars shone cold and clear beyond the glass, Leora knew one thing for certain. The human had seen her truth. And in doing so, he had taken her heart without ever asking for it. The war was not over, even after the victory. The enemy had retreated, but the Empire's silence was heavier than any explosion. When Leora returned to the palace, the council was waiting for her. They stood in a half-circle, cold and proud, their eyes full of judgment. She walked in still wearing her battle armor, her hair loose from the long hours of command. Elias followed a few steps behind her, his face calm but guarded. "Queen Leora," said High Counselor Tyron, his voice sharp as glass, "you disobeyed the law. You led troops into combat without our approval. This act cannot be ignored." Leora looked at him without fear. "I saved thousands of lives. The Zelkai fleet would have reached the capital if I hadn't gone." "That is not the point," another counselor snapped. "You risked your life. You risked the future of the throne." Elias stepped forward before she could speak. She risked herself because no one else would. "If she hadn't taken command, you'd all be standing here as prisoners, not judges." The council turned to him in outrage. "Silence, human." Tyron hissed. "You have no voice in this hall." Leora's voice rose, calm but firm. "He speaks because I allow it. And he is right." The room fell into stunned silence. For a long moment, no one dared to speak. Then Tyron said slowly, "You've changed, Your Majesty. You speak like a human now." She met his eyes. "Perhaps that's what this empire needs." The council gasped, but she turned away before they could answer. She left the hall, her robe sweeping across the marble floor, Elias following close behind. When they reached the quiet corridors beyond the council chamber, she finally stopped and pressed her hands to her face. "They'll come for me next," she said softly. "They'll strip me of the throne." Elias looked at her. "Then let them try. You did the right thing." Her voice shook a little. "You don't understand. Here, right and wrong don't matter, only power." "Then maybe it's time to change that," he said. She looked at him, her eyes full of questions. "Why do you keep standing by me, Elias?" "You could have left. You don't owe me anything." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I see something in you that reminds me of who I used to be. Someone who kept fighting when it seemed hopeless." Her breath caught in her throat. "You see too much," he nodded slowly. "And you hide too much." They stood in silence for a moment. The city lights below them shimmered through the tall windows, painting their faces with soft gold. Leora turned away, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I first saw you, I thought you were just another wanderer. Now I see why the stars sent you here." Elias frowned slightly. "The stars didn't send me. I just followed where I was needed." "Maybe it's the same thing," she said quietly. Days passed. The empire was recovering, but rumors grew stronger. Some said the queen had fallen under human influence. Others said she planned to change the old laws. Her advisors began to avoid her. Yet Leora didn't waver. Every time she felt the pressure of her crown, she remembered the battlefield, the sound of Elias's voice steady beside her, and she found courage again. One night, she called him to the old archive tower. It was a quiet place where ancient records glowed faintly in glass panels. "Do you know what this is?" she asked, showing him a small holographic tablet. He shook his head. "No. It's the first treaty between our worlds," she said. "Signed H. Hundreds of years ago, then forgotten. The Lyrians once believed humans could never rise beyond their gravity wells. But your kind did. You learned, adapted, survived. That is why I trust you." He looked at her closely. "Trust is rare among rulers." She smiled faintly. "It is rarer among humans, I've learned." They shared a quiet laugh, but the sound was fragile. Outside, the sky thundered with storm clouds. The palace sensors lit up red. Leora looked out the window as a voice came through the comms. "Your Majesty, unidentified ships approaching. They carry the council's crest." Her expression hardened. "They're coming for me." Elias stepped beside her. Then we'll face them. She turned to him, her voice low. If they take me, they'll call it justice. If you stay, they'll call it treason. He didn't flinch. I've been called worse. The doors burst open. Dozens of armored guards entered, their weapons raised. At their head stood Councillor Tyron. By decree of the Lyrian Council, he declared, Queen Leora is hereby removed from the throne for breaking the ancient laws. The guards advanced. Elias moved in front of her, his stance steady. You'll have to go through me first, Tyron sneered. A human dares to stand between a queen and her judgment? Leora's voice rang through the chamber. Enough, Tyron. You claim to protect the law, but you only protect your pride. Tyron's eyes flashed. You've let this human corrupt you. You've forgotten what it means to be Lyrian. No, she said softly. I finally remember what it means to be alive. Her words hung in the air like thunder. The guards hesitated, their loyalty shaken. Elias could see it, the doubt in their eyes. Slowly, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Tyron's voice broke with fury. You fools. You'd defy the council? One guard stepped forward. We serve the crown, not your fear. Tyron drew his weapon, but before he could fire, Elias moved. With a swift motion, he disarmed him, sending the weapon spinning across the floor. Tyron stumbled back, eyes wide with disbelief. Leora looked at him calmly. Your time is over. As the counselor was taken away, the storm outside faded into quiet rain. Leora turned to Elias, her voice trembling slightly. You've risked everything for me. He smiled softly. No, I just stood beside someone who finally stopped hiding. For the first time since she had become queen, Leora felt free not because she had power, but because someone had seen her heart and never looked away, and deep within her, she knew this was only the beginning of something greater than the empire itself. The days after the storm were quiet, but the silence carried weight. The empire was free again, yet the palace felt colder than before. Leora had removed the corrupt council, but their loyal supporters still lingered in the shadows, whispering about rebellion. The people loved her now more than ever, but power, she had learned, always carried a price. Elias stayed close, helping rebuild what the war and politics had broken. Every morning he walked through the city with her, watching how the people bowed deeply, their silver faces full of hope. For the first time, the Lyrians greeted a human not with distrust but with gratitude. Some even left small blue flowers on his path. A gesture of respect in their culture. Yet deep down, Elias knew peace was fragile. One evening, he found Leora standing on the palace balcony, staring at the horizon where the twin suns set. She looked strong, yet her eyes were distant. You've changed everything, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. No, Elias, you changed me. And because of that, the empire began to change. He shook his head. You already had that strength. You just needed someone to remind you. Her voice softened. You always speak as if you see more than I do. He looked at her calmly. Maybe I just look without fear. She turned to face him. And yet you never ask for anything in return. Why? Elias was silent for a while before answering. Because asking would make it less real. Her gaze lingered on him. The soft light caught the curve of her face, and for a heartbeat, the distance between them felt very small. Then a messenger drone arrived, interrupting the quiet. It carried a sealed message from the border colonies. Leora read it, and her expression turned grim. What is it? Elias asked. The Zelkai survivors, she said softly. They've regrouped. They're moving toward the unclaimed zones. They're not attacking us directly, but they're destroying settlements that refuse their rule. Elias frowned. They're testing your strength. They want to see if the Empire will fight again. She nodded slowly. If I move the fleet, my people will say I'm hungry for war. If I don't, thousands will die. He placed a hand on the railing beside her. Then you can't play by their rules anymore. Her voice trembled. If I act without the council, they'll call me a tyrant. If I hesitate, I'll be a coward. Either way, I lose. Elias looked out at the fading suns. Then stop playing their game. Make your own. That night she summoned her most trusted captains. Elias stood at her side as she spoke. The Lyrian Empire will not expand by conquest, she said. But we will defend those who cannot defend themselves. The Zelkai took everything from us once. We will not let them take from others. The captains looked uncertain at first, but her voice carried power, and soon heads began to nod. A new fleet was prepared, not one of domination, but of protection. And at its heart stood a human whose courage had reminded them what strength truly meant. As the ships prepared to launch, Elias walked through the hangar. Every pilot saluted him, something unheard of before. Leora joined him, her armor shining faintly in the blue light. "You shouldn't come this time," she said softly. "You've done enough." He looked at her with a half smile. "That's not for me to decide. Besides, someone has to keep reminding you to stay alive." She laughed quietly, but her eyes glistened. "You're impossible." "Maybe," he said. "But I keep my promises." They left together once more, heading toward the unclaimed zone. The fleet moved through the dark, following her command. When the Zelkai fleet appeared on the scanners, the sight was massive, twice what they had expected. The first wave hit them hard. Explosions lit up the void, ships scattering across the field. Leora gave orders quickly, her voice calm even as alarms rang. Elias manned the auxiliary systems, his hands moving across the controls with practiced speed. At one point, a Zelkai cruiser broke through and aimed straight for the flagship. The defense shields were failing. Leora shouted commands, but it was too late. The impact came. The ship lurched violently, throwing everyone to the floor. Smoke filled the bridge. Elias pushed himself up, coughing. "Status?" "Shields gone," one officer said. "We've lost the forward guns." Leora's eyes darted to the screen. "We can't retreat." "Not now." He looked at her and saw the same fire he'd seen on the first day they met. "Then we fight," he said. He rerouted the power manually, pulling energy from non-essential systems. The ship's cannons roared back to life. Together they fought through the chaos, their voices blending with the hum of the battle. Hours passed, and at last the enemy ships began to fall back. The last Zelkai vessel vanished into the void. Silence returned once again. The bridge was damaged, the air filled with smoke and sparks. Leora leaned against the console, breathing heavily. Elias moved to steady her. "You're hurt," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Just tired." He smiled faintly. "You always say that." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. "If I survive all this, it will be because of you." He shook his head. "No, because you finally learned to believe in yourself." Outside, the stars were clear again. The fleet was battered, but victorious. Leora looked at the endless dark ahead, the unclaimed worlds, the unknown future, and for the first time she didn't feel afraid. Beside her, the human stood silently, his gaze steady on the horizon. In that quiet moment, she knew their paths were forever tied, not by duty or crown, but by the unspoken truth that had grown between them. The stars were calm again, spread across the dark like a river of silver fire. The battle was over. The enemy was gone, and the Lyrian fleet drifted in the quiet that follows war. Inside the flagship, soft lights replaced the red emergency glow. The air was heavy with exhaustion, but there was also peace, something rare after so much loss. Elias stood near the observation deck, looking out into the vastness of space. The wreckage of ships floated far in the distance, their remains shining faintly in the light of the twin suns. Behind him he heard slow footsteps. Leora walked toward him, her armor removed, her silver robe flowing softly. She looked tired, yet her presence still carried the same quiet strength that had led millions. "You should rest," Elias said gently. She shook her head. "I can't rest yet. Too many voices are waiting for answers. Too many lost ones need to be remembered." He turned to her. "You did what no ruler before you dared to do. You stood for more than pride. You gave your people something real to believe in." Her voice trembled slightly. "Maybe, but I couldn't have done it alone." Elias smiled faintly. "You were never alone. You just thought you were." For a long time they stood in silence, looking out at the stars. The view was endless, and yet for both of them it felt like home. Leora finally spoke again, her tone softer. "When I first saw you, I thought you were just another wanderer. But you changed everything. You made me see my world differently." He looked at her with calm eyes. "Sometimes the hardest thing is not fighting an enemy. It's convincing people to see the truth." She stepped closer, her voice low. "And what is your truth, Elias?" He thought for a moment. That every life, every choice has worth. Even in the darkest places, someone's courage can bring light. Her eyes glistened as she looked at him. "You speak as if you've carried that light for a long time." He nodded slightly. "Maybe, but now I think I can finally let it rest," she frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked back out at the stars. "I came here by accident, remember? My ship was damaged, my mission gone. But I stayed because I found something I didn't know I was searching for." Her voice softened. "And what was that?" He met her gaze, and the answer came simply. A reason. For a long moment she said nothing. The silence between them was full of meaning, full of the things neither of them could say aloud. Then the ship's intercom broke the moment. A young officer's voice called, "Your Majesty, the Council representatives are requesting contact. They wish to speak with you regarding the treaty." Leora took a slow breath. The Council? Even after all this, they still want control. Elias nodded. They'll try. But this time you'll stand with your people, not behind their words. She gave him a small smile. You always make it sound easy. It never is, he said. But you've already done the hardest part. You changed their hearts. She turned to go, but then hesitated. Elias, when this is over, what will you do? He shrugged lightly. Humans are wanderers. Maybe I'll move on to the next world. Help where I can. That's what we do. Her eyes lowered and her voice became a whisper. Then my world will be emptier when you go. He smiled softly. Maybe. But I'll never really be gone. That evening, she stood before the Empire through a galaxy-wide broadcast. The people gathered in cities, villages, and starships to listen. Her voice was steady, filled with the quiet power that had returned hope to her kind. She spoke not as a queen above them, but as one of them. She told them of unity, of compassion, of courage learned from a human who saw her not as a ruler but as a person. When the speech ended, cheers echoed through every channel of the Empire. For the first time in centuries, the Lyrians spoke of peace not as a dream, but as a choice. Later, as the palace rested under the twin moons, Leora returned to the balcony. The cool wind moved gently through her hair. She looked for Elias, but the place where he often stood was empty. A small message device rested on the stone railing. Her hands trembled slightly as she activated it. His voice came through quiet and warm. Leora, if you're hearing this, it means I've gone before dawn. Don't look for me. There are other places that need help now. Other wars that need quiet endings. You gave your people hope. Don't lose it. And don't forget what we learned together. Strength isn't in armor or laws, it's in hearts that dare to care. The message ended. For a long time she stood there listening to the wind. Her chest ached, but she didn't cry. Instead, she lifted her gaze to the stars, and for the first time she smiled through the ache. Weeks later, the Empire entered a new age. The Council became a voice of balance, not command. Borders opened, trade returned, and humans were welcomed as friends. The old pride that once defined the Lyrians was replaced by something brighter, humility born from understanding. And sometimes, when Leora stood at the window and looked toward the dark between the stars, she imagined a lone ship moving silently through that vast space, a human wanderer with calm eyes and a quiet soul. She whispered into the night, "Wherever you are, may the stars guide you." The wind carried her words into the sky, fading into the same starlight that had once brought him to her. In that moment, she understood that love did not end with distance or silence. It lived on in the change it left behind, in the courage to be seen, the strength to be kind, and the hope that two hearts from different worlds could still beat in harmony across the stars. And though the galaxy was endless, somewhere out there she knew he heard her.